Okay, we've arrived at session 4 of Unified English Braille for Vision Professionals. This video, we are moving up beyond contractions and into all sorts of other things regarding UEB. Today we're going to be talking about two different topics, capitalization and grade 1 mode. I put these two topics together because they operate in much the same way, which makes for a rather long video. My apologies, but here we go with capitalization. First, some more terminology. I just mentioned mode, and I just want that term to fall on your ears for now. We'll talk about this later in the second half of this video. But it's a condition initiated by an indicator and describing the effect of the indicator on subsequent Braille signs. That's very fancy language for saying we're going to put an indicator in front of something to mean read the next cell or cells in a certain way, like as opposed to another way. So, as I said, we'll be talking more about that later. A passage UEB defines as 3 or more symbols sequences. Symbol sequences, remember, basically anything between two spaces. And with UEB, a passage is considered 3 or more of those symbol sequences. In the old code, in EBAE, it was more than 3 words that were considered a passage. So, for instance, we would have italics, double italic indicator, and then we would put the single italic indicator on the last word of the passage, and it had to be more than 3 words. In UEB, it's starts with 3, so we're starting earlier. We're making a passage a smaller chunk of information. 3 or more symbol sequences, not just words like they were in EBAE. It's symbol sequences. And we have things that indicate this passage. So a passage indicator initiates that mode, that special way of reading things, which persists indefinitely until an explicit terminator is encountered. That means that whenever we start a passage, we have to be sure and end it, otherwise it continues on and on forever until we end the volume or even the book. So we need to be careful with passages to always terminate them. We'll be talking more about that. And then just a reminder that standing alone is a condition used to determine when a Braille sign is read as a contraction. As I promised, standing alone is mentioned all the way through this whole video series, so that's a very important concept, if not the foundational concept of UEB. Okay, here we go with capitalization. The capital letter indicator is still our .6. I haven't even mentioned it until now. It's just been part of the drills and homework, and you probably didn't even notice because there was nothing special to point out about it. The capitals word indicator is like what we had in EBAE, it just has a different name. And there are certain rules that are different, but it's 2 cells of .6. Then we have something new called the capitals passage indicator, and that is 3 cells of .6. Remember, a passage is 3 symbol sequences or more. And in order to terminate that passage, we have what is the capitals terminator, and it's .6 and .3. You may recognize that as the terminator that we used in EBAE for everything. That was just our sign to say whatever we started, we stopped. But in UEB, remember our principle of prefixes and roots. So we have what's being terminated, which is the .6 with capitals, and then a .3 to terminate it. So yes, as I said, the capital indicator is a prefix because it's on only the right part of the cell. The capital terminator consists of the .6 prefix and then the terminating .3. We'll see other terminators later, and they are always constructed by the thing being terminated, which is the prefix, and then a .3. So this configuration, .6, .3, only terminates capitals mode. It does not terminate anything else. So in the old code, that was our termination symbol for everything. But in UEB, it's very specific. It only terminates the capital mode that we're in. Follow print for the use of capital letters, except when they are a visual embellishment, such as at the beginning of paragraphs and chapters. So Wherever we see a capital letter, we're going to make it capital in Braille, unless it's some fancy thing like a very stylistic letter. The capital letter indicator works the same as it did in EBAE. So we have one note, and there you can see why we are no longer using the contraction for ATION anymore, because in today's world we could very easily have a capital N, and now in UEB it means only capital N, so no confusion. And then PowerPoint, same thing, just put a capital indicator where it's needed. The capitalized word indicator, that was our symbol indicator that we just talked about. Now the capitalized word indicator sets capitals mode for the next letters sequence or the remainder of the current letters sequence. So we're only talking about letters, a sequence of letters here. We're not talking about other symbols that might be in there. The default treatment for a sequence of capital letters is capitals word mode, as opposed to individually capitalizing each letter. The effect of the capitalized word indicator only carries through letters. We were just talking about letter sequences, so that's all we're talking about. Those letters can be just regular letters. They can be modified. Those are accented letters, or ligatured. Anything else terminates the capitals. So there has to be a letter of some kind following it, otherwise it goes back to lowercase. So here we have the first example, TV Ontario. And because of the way we say it, TV Ontario, we don't say TV Ontario. So we're using the capital word indicator there, 2 cells of .6, TV, and then a single capital letter, and that's not, or capital indicator, and that's not a letter, so that means our capitals word mode has just ended. But we need to start up the capital symbol indicator for O for the name Ontario. So we have capital, capital, TV, single capital, Ontario. McGraw-Hill, we have capital M, C is lowercase. Then we have the capital word indicator there, 2 cells of .6, GRA, and then we have a hyphen. That's not a letter, so it terminates capitals mode, so we have to start it up again for Hill. That's different than what we had before. Before, a hyphen didn't terminate capitals mode, we could just keep carrying on. But in UEB, anything other than a letter is going to terminate the capitals mode. UW-Madison. Technically, in the old code, we would have to terminate capitals after the M in Madison. But that was very awkward, of course, and so we kind of fudged the rules, and we did it the way you see here, which is now the correct way to do it. So we have capital word mode for UW, hyphen, capitals has terminated, so we have to start it up again for Madison with the M being capitalized. Okayed, the OK is capitalized, an apostrophe is not a letter, so capitals have just ended, and then we have our lowercase d. But if we have an apostrophe and a capital S, that means we have to start up the capital mode again for McDonald's. So McDonald's, we have capital symbol indicator for M, C is lowercase, capital word indicator, .6.6. Donald, the apostrophe ends capitals, so we have to start up again with capital, single capital S for the apostrophe S. On to capitalized passages now. A passage is, again, 3 or more symbol sequences, so now we can carry through anything. It doesn't have to be just letters. But there must be 3 or more symbol sequences. A capitalized passage is terminated only by the capitals terminator. So nothing else is going to terminate it unless we specifically say capitals mode has terminated, we're done. So we always have to remember that. So our first example, we have a self-made man. That's 3 symbol sequences there, not 4. We have 3. Is 1, self-made is 2, and then man is 3. So we have 3, that's a passage, and we're going to indicate that with 3 cells of .6. Then nothing else, we don't use the capital indicator again anywhere because we've said that whatever follows this is going to be in full caps until we say stop. So we have a, self-made, man, none of that is individually capitalized. And then we terminate it with that capital indicator .6 and the .3. The BBC Africa News, that's 4 symbol sequences. And normally we would capitalize that BBC if we were in lowercase elsewhere. That BBC is an acronym, or technically it's an initialism. But here with the passage, it's already capitalized with that capitalized passage indicator of 3 cells of .6. So the BBC Africa News, and again we would normally capitalize Africa, but it's already capitalized. So the BBC Africa News, then we're terminating it with our .6 prefix and the root of .3. Some more examples. For sale, 1975 Firebird. The whole thing is 4 symbol sequences. And even with that colon and that year with the numbers thrown in, it doesn't matter. We're still we're saying that that whole thing, if it's a letter, it's capitalized. So we have our capital passage indicator, 3 cells of .6, for sale, 1975, Firebird. We have to be sure and terminate that passage, so we have our prefix with .6 and the terminating .3. Same thing with caution wet paint. It doesn't matter what punctuation is in there. We're starting off with our capitalized passage indicator there. It carries through the colon, the space, the exclamation point, but we have to be sure and terminate it at the end. In our last example on this screen, AA, parentheses, Alan, parenthesis, Alan Alexander, closing parenthesis, Milne. That whole thing is a passage because we have 1, 2, 3, 4 symbol sequences. So we have a passage started off with 3 cells of .6, and be sure and terminate it with our capitals terminator. If we have to divide something at the end of a Braille line, then a fully capitalized hyphenated compound word divided at the hyphen begins the new Braille line with the capitalized word indicator, which is already required because it's after a hyphen. So really there's nothing different about breaking a fully capitalized hyphenated compound word. It's just that because we already had to use the capital word mode indicator in front of Anglo and Saxon because of that hyphen. So nothing there has changed. However, if you, the transcriber or the writer, when you're writing Braille, insert a hyphen to divide a word at the end of a Braille line, it does not terminate capitals word mode. It's considered still in capitalized word. So we have inter, and then we've stuck in a hyphen, and then said national. So we don't need to repeat the capital word mode for the national part of that word because it's still in effect. Sometimes it would be correct to use either the capital letter or the capitals word mode. Use the method that retains the usual Braille form, best conveys the meaning, and gives the most consistency. An example of that would be okay. Normally we use the word indicator for that, .6, okay, instead of capital O, capital K. And because that's how we do it when there is no D after it, and we say okayed, we're not then going to switch practices and do .60.K because we didn't do that when it was just its own little word. So we are going to do our capital word indicator there, okay, and then we're going to terminate it for our D, even though that takes up more cells than capital O, capital K, D. Another consideration is to choose the method which best conveys the meaning and avoids the need for capital indicators or terminators within natural subunits of an expression. So for instance, a software program platform that we used to have here at the center, it was called PTA Web. That's how we set it, PTA Web. So technically, you can see PTA and W are all capitals, but it would be very awkward to end capitals after the W to put a terminator in there. So because it's the natural way we say it, we have capital word indicators there, PTA, and then our single capital terminates the capital word mode. But we have our single capitals, W, and then EB is lowercase. Sometimes things are not actually a passage, even though it technically is three symbol sequences that are capitalized. A capitalized letter or letter sequence might not be part of a passage, especially if it is separated by space or punctuation. So here's an example. He worked for the ABC, period. Starting a new sentence. A BBC journalist reported something. So ABC is part of one sentence. The word is capitalized because it's at the beginning of a sentence. That's just a grammatical practice that we do. And then BBC is another acronym, or initialism is the proper term. So again, technically that's three symbol sequences, but they're capitalized for different reasons. So we're not going to treat this as a passage because that would really confuse the reading of it if you think about it. So we are going to use just the word capital word indicator for ABC, end our sentence normally, capitalize our next sentence normally with the word and then we're going to start the capital word mode for BBC. Capitalization of multiple elements. Now, UEB says an element is a piece of information, a chunk of information within a context. In a capitalized series of paragraphs or listed items, each item is preceded by the capitalized passage indicator, and the capitals mode is terminated only at the end of the final text element. So here the elements might be each paragraph or each item in a list. And each of those things are going to be capitalized individually, but we're not going to start and stop each paragraph or each item. We're just going to start to tell the reader, yes, capitals are still ongoing, and we end it at the very end of whatever this passage is. For instance, suppose we have a conversation and it's two people yelling at each other. Maybe it's a loud environment. And one person says, "Don't go in there." So we have a passage because that's more than three or more symbol sequences. So we have our three cells of .6, don't go in there, and then the next line is the other person talking. So we haven't terminated don't go in there. We're carrying on with the capitals, and we're just reminding the Braille reader that this is going on. So we have don't go in there, and then what? So we have capital passage indicator there again, still not terminating because the next line is also still fully capitalized. So we're starting that again, reminding the reader that we're still in capitals. I said don't go in there. So then we are terminating that whole passage with our .6, .3 at the very end of it all. Another example might be a list of things. So be sure to bring is just a phrase. So that is one element. That's and it's a passage because it's more than, excuse me, I have to remember this too, three or more symbol sequences. So we have our passage indicator there. Be sure to bring, and we're terminating it because the next thing is a list. That's a separate chunk of information. So the list then is starting off with tent, sleeping bag, water, first aid kit, and bug spray. Each of those things is an element, and each one gets its start with the passage indicator, but we don't terminate it until the very end where we have bug spray. Where the text elements do not constitute a continuous passage, such as a series of headings, then each text element is capitalized and terminated separately. So here we have two long headings. They wrap around, so we're not treating each line as being an element, because it's Unified English Braille for Vision Professionals is all one title. It just happens to be long enough that it has to be wrapped around. So we're treating it as one element. And obviously it's a passage because it's three or more symbol sequences. So we have our passage indicator there, three cells of .6, and then our Terminator with .6.3. The next heading is something separate. It's another major heading under the first major heading. So we have Session 3, separate capitalized elements. That is a passage, because it's more than 3 symbol sequences, and then we terminate that passage as its own entity there after the word elements. A single heading is capitalized as a unit even if it extends over more than one Braille line. We basically just saw that, and if it's a really long thing, then before we had Unified English Braille, and that was its own heading, and then we had a separation there with Session 3 for vision professionals. With this, though, it's all one heading, and so we're going to treat the whole thing as one long heading that it is. So we capitalize the passage and end it at the very end of that long heading. The capitals terminator is placed after the final capitalized letter. So suppose we have the initials of writer in all caps and then a slash, and then the initials of secretaries in lowercase. We terminate capitals after the R in writer, not after the slash. The two CEOs met in our CEO's office. So the first CEOs, it's a plural of CE. There are two of them, two CEOs. So we need to terminate the capitals after the O in CEO because the S is in lowercase. But where we have CEO apostrophe S, the apostrophe terminates the capitals mode, so we don't need to terminate it there. The capitals terminator may precede or follow punctuation and other terminators, but it is best to close paired punctuation and indicators in reverse order of opening. So paired punctuation might be quotation marks, parentheses, brackets, braces, that sort of thing. In indicators, we'll be talking about those a lot more, but this again would be, what we're talking about right now would be capital indicators. So here's a sentence, it's a hoax, then we have a parenthesis, April Fool, punctuation mark, exclamation mark, and then the closing parenthesis. So we have our capitals passage indicator there because we have three or more symbol sequences. It carries on through until we terminate it. We could terminate it right after the L in fool. We could terminate it after the exclamation point, or we could terminate it after the closing parenthesis there. But since we started our passage with at the very beginning with a capitals mode indicator of some kind, so we have a passage indicator, and then we had a parenthesis. So instead of putting then the capitals terminator before the closing parenthesis, we're closing the parentheses first because we started it second. So we started it after the capitals indicator, and we're enclosing the parentheses there around April Fool exclamation point, and then we're terminating it because it would be rather awkward to terminate it first and then have the parenthesis, since that kind of weaves things in and out, as opposed to finish what we started first and then making it clearer to read. Before we go on to the next topic, you might want to stop the video and just take a break. Otherwise, we'll keep going with grade 1 mode. So we've just been talking about capitalized word mode, and as I mentioned, mode just means a different way of reading the next cells, for instance, reading the next cell or cells as capitals as opposed to lowercase. That's a mode. We've had modes all along. For instance, another example is dots 1 and 2. That dot configuration can mean the letter B, or it can mean the whole word but, or it could mean 2, the number 2, depending on the presence of indicators. So that's what a mode is. It's just another way of reading what comes next. So we talked about capitals mode, and there are 5 other modes that we'll be talking about in this series. Grade 1 mode, numeric mode, line mode, shape mode, and arrow mode. So the second half of this video is going to talk about grade 1 mode because, as I said, it operates much the same way as capitals mode did. Grade 1 mode tells the reader that what follows is not to be read as a contraction or numeral. Grade 1 mode occurs within contracted and uncontracted Braille. Now, the United States switched from calling the Braille grade 1 or grade 2 Braille some time ago because it was confusing with the academic grades 1, 2, 3, etc. So we went with calling that kind of Braille either contracted or uncontracted Braille. The other English-speaking countries, remember UEB is an international code, the other English-speaking countries didn't necessarily adopt that policy. They were still calling it grade 1 and grade 2. And since the United States came on board with UEB rather late in the game, we didn't get to say that's confusing for us to call this mode grade 1 mode because it means something else to us. So we are stuck calling it grade 1 mode. And again, what grade 1 mode means is that what comes next is not to be read as a contraction or numeral. Grade 1 mode does not mean uncontracted Braille. It means that what follows is not a contraction or a numeral. So grade 1 Braille, though, is uncontracted Braille. Grade 2 Braille is contracted Braille. Again, grade 1 mode occurs within grade 1 or grade 2 Braille. The symbols for grade 1 mode are very similar to the capitals that we just looked at. There's a grade 1 symbol indicator with dots 5, 6. There's a grade 1 word indicator, 2 cells of dots 5, 6. And a grade 1 passage indicator, 3 cells of dots 5, 6. And our grade 1 terminator, what's being terminated, dots 5, 6, that's a prefix, and our dot 3. A grade 1 symbol indicator is used when a symbol could be misread as a contraction or a numeral. It is not ever required before the letters A, I, and O because in the English language those are already words and they can't be confused with anything else. So an example of this is the vowels are colon, A, E, I, O, and U. So in Braille, A never needs a grade 1 indicator, but E does. If it was just an E there with a comma after it, that would be standing alone. There's a space on one side and space on the other, the comma notwithstanding. So we need a grade 1 symbol indicator in front of that E. I never needs a grade 1 indicator. Neither does O. Then we have the word and. U needs an indicator because it could be mistaken as the contraction for us because it's standing alone with a space on either side. More examples. J.S. Bach. In the previous code, we did not need indicators in front of the J and S because it was understood from a human context that because it was a period, oh, it must be an initial. Again, we're much more computerized these days, so UEB is trying to be more consistent, quite honestly, with the treatment of single letters. So it has that standing alone rule. And according to that standing alone rule, the J and the S are standing alone because they have a space on one side and a space on the other. The capital indicator and the period do not affect that standing alone status. So they would be read as capital just period, capital so period, if we didn't have the presence of those grade 1 symbol indicators in front of them. So now those are necessary in front of initials. The next example, I think that's Italian. I'm not going to try to pronounce it, but that E there would be standing alone, and so we need the grade 1 indicator. As I said, the grade 1 symbol indicator doesn't affect just letters. In the old code, EBAE, we called it the letter indicator. It was the same dot configuration, dot 5, 6. And we called it the letter indicator because it only affected letters. We could only use it in front of letters. But in UEB, it affects anything that follows. So it has a lot more power than it did before. And this third example here on the screen demonstrates that. We can use it in front of that question mark, that is an actual punctuation question mark, to say, don't read this as the contraction for his. It means read it as the symbol that it represents, which is a question mark. But the exclamation point can't be mistaken for anything else, so we don't need a grade 1 indicator in front of that. The next example, ending in dash S or dash ES. Remember, standing alone is anything with a space, hyphen, or dash on either side of it. So without that grade 1 indicator, we have a dash on one side and a space on the other. That S would be read as so because the S is standing alone. We don't want it read as so we have a grade 1 indicator to say this is the real letter S, not the word so. But with the dash ES, ES can't be mistaken for anything, so we don't need a grade 1 indicator there. The letters A to G, and A and G are within quotation marks. A, as I said, never needs a grade 1 symbol indicator in front of it, but G does. We have an opening quote on one side and a closing quote on the other. Those are in the proper position. We have spaces on either side of that, so that G is standing alone, and we need that grade 1 symbol indicator to prevent it being read as the word go. More examples, because this is a really important point. Again, we have sections H and I. H and I are in parentheses, not quotes this time, but the principle still holds. We have opening parentheses or parenthesis on either side of the letters, and a closing parenthesis on the other side. So, and then spaces on either side of that. So the H and the I are technically still standing alone. That means we need a grade 1 symbol indicator in front of the H, but I never needs it. The next example, we have a local dialect. Did E and Mom get to it? I don't even know how you say that. But we have the E, there's an apostrophe in front of it, spaces on either side. That means that E would be standing alone. So we need to put the grade 1 symbol indicator in front of it, so that's not read as the word every. Same thing with the N, but we have apostrophes on either side of the N there, but that's okay because the rules for standing alone say that an apostrophe can be before a letter or an after a letter, and it doesn't affect the standing alone status of that letter. So we have basically spaces on either side of that N, the apostrophes notwithstanding, so we need that grade 1 symbol indicator in front of that N, so it's read as N, not the word not. And same principle with the ending T there. We have an apostrophe on one side, a question mark after it. Those things do not affect standing alone status, so we need the grade 1 symbol indicator. But if we have the abbreviation C/O for care of, that C has a space on one side and a slash on the other, so that is not standing alone. We do not need a grade 1 symbol indicator there. The people's right, we have spaces on either side of that P apostrophe S. An apostrophe S does not affect standing alone status, so we're okay there. The P means the word people. But if we really do want it to mean P, as in P's and Q's, then we need to put that grade 1 symbol indicator in front of the P because of the standing alone status. And the same for Q, for Q's. Moving on now to the grade 1 word indicator. The grade 1 word indicator sets grade 1 mode for the next symbol sequence, or the remainder of the current symbols sequence. Now with our capitals mode, it was letter sequence only, but with grade 1 indicators, the grade 1 indicator goes through an entire symbol sequence, so it doesn't have to be just letters. The effect is terminated by a space or a grade 1 terminator, so it's either just going to end when we get to the end of the symbol sequence, or if it stops before that, then we need to specifically say so. So our first example is something where a space just stops. So we have a grade 1 word indicator there. That means that the entire symbol sequence is in grade 1 mode until we get to the space that follows. So it's, rather than individually put a grade 1 symbol indicator in front of each of those letters except the I because it doesn't need it, that would be very unwieldy. So we're using the grade 1 word indicator there. But our next example, we have a whole bunch of P's before the word perishing, perishing. So we have our grade 1, grade 1 word indicator there for all those P's. Don't read them as the word people, because all of those P's have either a space on one side and a hyphen on the other, or they have hyphens on either side. So they're all standing alone, and without that grade 1 word indicator there, they would be read as people, 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 people. We don't want that. So we have a grade 1 word indicator there. But then we're terminating it because we want to use contractions for the word perishing. So we have our terminator there with our prefix of 5, 6, what's being terminated, and then our terminating cell of .3. Otherwise, we would have to either spell out the word perishing, or, well, yeah, that's our other choice, is to spell out the word perishing, which takes up more cells. Usage with short forms. Grade 1 mode is required to prevent a letter sequence from being misread as a short form or as containing a short form. We use a grade 1 symbol indicator, not a word indicator, before a letter sequence that could be read as a short form when standing alone, or if that short form occurs at the beginning of a longer letters sequence. So here are some examples to point that out. We have CD-ROM. We have dots 5, 6. That's our grade 1 symbol indicator. We're not using the word indicator, but we do have a capital word indicator there for CD. So that's just the same thing that we did with EBAE. So no change there. It's just worded differently. Then we have a hyphen, which terminates the capitals mode because it isn't a letter, but grade 1 mode is still there in effect, ROM, but we don't have any contractions, so we don't have anything to worry about. The next example is, could you buy a CD/DVD? In this example, CD is not standing alone because it has a space on one side and a slash on the other. So it can't be confused with anything. We do not need a grade 1 indicator there in front of the CD there because it's not standing alone. The next example, still on the CD concept, we have our grade 1 symbol indicator, not the word, capitals word indicator, and then CD. We definitely need the grade 1 symbol indicator there because CD is standing alone with a space on either side. But the next example, CD plural, S, CD is not standing alone anymore because there's an S there. It has another letter there, not a space, a hyphen, or dash. So we have a space, capital, capital, CD, we're terminating it with our capitals terminator there, and then we have S. We do not need a grade 1 indicator there, again, because of that S. Al dente, that AL could be misread as the short form also because there's a space on either side. It's standing alone. So we need to have that grade 1 symbol indicator there. Again, notice it's a grade 1 symbol indicator, not the grade 1 word indicator. Use the Alt key. ALT could be mistaken for the short form altogether. It's standing alone. So we have our grade 1 symbol indicator there to make sure that it's read as the ALT, not the word altogether. Braille, remember the rule was use the grade 1 symbol indicator if the short form occurred at the beginning of the word. But here we have BRL, it's at the end of this letter sequence. So we're not going to start out grade 1 mode in the middle of this word, I guess you'd call it. So we're going to call the whole letter sequence as in grade 1. So we have our grade 1 word indicator to make sure it's read as OZBRL, not Braille. Grade 1 passage indicator sets grade 1 mode for the next passage and is terminated by the grade 1 terminator. Remember, we always have to terminate our passages specifically. So our sentence here is, he spelled Ho Chi Minh City. Ho Chi Minh is separated by hyphens indicating spelling, and it's 3 symbol sequences. That's a passage. So we have our 3 cells of dots 5, 6 indicating a grade 1 passage. The whole thing we're in grade 1, not reading anything as a contraction or a numeral until we terminate it after the H in min with our prefix of dots 5, 6 and then the terminator dot 3. A grade 1 indicator precedes a capitalization indicator. So we've seen that in action already. We have a grade 1 symbol indicator here in this example, and then our capitals. We don't have use capitals and then put the grade 1 symbol indicator directly in front of that T. The grade 1 symbol indicator comes first, then our capitals, because capitals always get hugged up to the letter. You can't separate capitals from the letter that follows. So we have grade 1 symbol indicator, capitals, directly followed by the T there, hyphen, we've just terminated capitals, or no, excuse me, we haven't. Nothing terminates a capitals passage. So we have hyphen, shirts, for sale, we're terminating it there with our capital terminator. Sometimes there's a choice of indicators. We could do one way or the other. We could use symbol indicators or word indicators or passage indicators. What do we do then? Well, choose the method that will result in the fewest switches between grades, the number of indicators required, and the number of cells used. So keep in mind the poor reader has to keep switching in and out of all these modes. For instance, in unemotional, it's broken up into syllables. We could do capital passage, or we could, as the second thing shows, put a grade 1 symbol indicator in front of that single word E, and in front of the AL to prevent it being read as the word also, because it's standing alone with a hyphen on one side and space on the other. So we need 2 grade 1 symbol indicators there if we do it that way. That means we're switching in and out of modes. We're starting out in regular Braille mode, then we're switching to grade 1 mode, then switching out of it, and out of it again for the TION syllable, and then going back into grade 1 for the AL at the end. That's a lot of back and forth. It's much easier on the reader to say this whole symbol sequence is going to be in grade 1 mode. So grade 1 word indicator, 2 cells of dots 5, 6, then the whole thing is read as uncontracted, and we don't need to say anything further, whether it's uncontracted or contracted or grade 1 mode or what have you. Our next example with cheese, again, spelling it out, capitals word indicator, and then that whole symbol sequence then is understood to be in grade 1 mode, instead of having to do each letter individually. And then we have please. There are only 2 P's there in this symbol sequence. So it makes sense now to use the grade 1 symbol indicator in front of each of those 2 P's, as opposed to having a grade 1 word indicator and then either terminating the capitals or grade 1 mode or spelling out please. So again, take into account the readability of the symbol sequence that you're working with. Here are some more examples. We have don't. There's only 1 D, so we're using just the symbol indicator in front of that 1 D. Then we have a hyphen, and don't doesn't have any Braille contractions, so we don't have to worry about that. The next example is don't. We have 3 Ds now, and so it makes sense now to use the grade 1 word indicator instead of individually marking each one with a grade 1 symbol indicator. Yes, this is where I usually get all tongue-tied. My apologies. The next example, we have the dictionary. Now here in dictionary, we do have Braille contractions that we would like to use. In the previous 2 examples, we had don't, which doesn't have any contractions, so we didn't have to take that into consideration. But here we do. So we have a grade 1 symbol indicator in front of each of those 3 Ds, so that we can just go right into using contractions for the word dictionary. That's better than using the grade 1 word indicator and then having to terminate it for dictionary. It takes more cells. It takes 1 more cell to do that. Our last example, we have superstition. Grade 1 word indicator works best for this because we have 4 S's, and then we're terminating it so that we can use the contractions for super and then T-I-O-N, S-T and then T-I-O-N at the end. Notice we have to spell out S-T because if we use the contraction for ST, that's 3, 4, it would be standing alone because we have a hyphen on either side of it, and it would be read as the word still. We don't want that, so we have to spell out ST. Capitalized initials. 3 initials, spaced and with periods, is technically a passage, but it's better to follow the intent of the print and treat each initial individually. It doesn't really say that in the rules, but I've talked with people from the International Council on English Braille and NBA, National Braille Association, and others. So this is the preferred method of doing initials that with 3 or more letters. So for example, FDR, we use the grade 1 symbol indicator in front of F, D, and R rather than calling it a passage and then using grade 1 symbol indicators in front of each of those letters, then having to terminate it. It looks very odd. It's something you have to kind of think about to understand what it is. So it's much easier, it's much more natural to just use the grade 1 symbol indicator in front of each grade 1 symbol indicator in front of each of them, and also capitalize individually as opposed to treating it as a capitalized passage. But if there are no spaces in between, then we're using we just braille what we see. We have capital F period, capital D period, capital R period, no spaces. Or if there aren't any periods at all, it's just FDR capitalized, then we're using the capital word indicator there. If the text would be the same in grade 1 or grade 2 mode, meaning uncontracted or contracted, because there are no contractions, a grade 1 indicator may be used, but it's not required. So this example here, the engine stuttered, so we have M's that are surrounded by hyphens. Those would be standing alone. It would be read as the word more. We don't want that. We want them read as just M. So we need the grade 1 word passage indicator, grade 1 word indicator there. But for the next sequence, none of those things could be misread as a word or a contraction or a number. But for consistency, since we just use the grade 1 word indicator there, then we're going to use it for all of them because it just makes for more consistent reading. So the second and then apparently the engine takes off with a whole bunch of M's all mashed together. None of that could be mistaken for anything, but again, for the sake of consistency, we're going to continue using the grade 1 word indicator there in front of each of them. Suppose we really are in uncontracted Braille though. In uncontracted Braille, grade 1 indicators are not used except as required for other reasons. For instance, the lowercase letters A through J immediately following digits, or question mark in an unusual position. So our first example is pretty straightforward. C is for candy. We're not using contractions, so that C can't be mistaken for the word can because we're not using contractions. But in the next example, question 3C, obviously that C could be misread as the numeral 3. And so we see question 33. That's not what we mean, so we need that grade 1 symbol indicator there in front of the C, even though we're in uncontracted Braille. Okay, we're at the end. Thanks for hanging in there. That concludes session 4. I hope to see you back here for session 5. Thank you.